Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Richard C. Hoagland back with us, principal investigator, founder of the Enterprise mission, as well as the vision and voice of the Other Side of Midnight show. He is the recipient of the Engstrom Medal and former science advisor to CBS News and the late Walter Cronkite. Together with Carl Sagan, Richard co-created what is called the Pioneer Plaque and predicted life on Europa in his groundbreaking paper, The Europa Proposal, published 37 years before NASA decided to think, you know what, these folks might be right. Richard C. Hoagland, back on Coast to Coast. Richard, how have you been?
George, it's hot.
It is, and smoky everywhere.
I'm at 6,500 feet. And it's hot as blazes. It's kind of like a kind of a side trip to Venus. So let me introduce you to the next level of reality, which is, as you know, 3 or 4 weeks ago, after fighting me tooth and nail for decades, 40-plus years, if not longer, since it was on the table before I really got involved, NASA suddenly says, out of the blue, they're going to look at extraterrestrial artifacts all across the solar system.
I was shocked by that. You've got to have been, too.
No.
Why not?
Because we got the data.
Well, I know, but aren't you shocked that they came out and decided to do it?
Everywhere, all at once. This is part of the model. Remember Brookings? Remember that?
A long time ago. I remember you talking about that 20-some years ago.
Exactly. Well, this is an official NASA study created literally within months of its being born by an edict from President Eisenhower and congressional legislation in 1958. Well, a few months later, the Long Range Committee of NASA was basically told, pull together a bunch of eminent scientists in all kinds of different studies and disciplines. Does that sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
And they worked like for 8-9 months on a study for the agency of what would happen in what they euphemistically call in Washington the out years. Ever wonder why they're called the out years?
Why?
Because the guys who do the studies are out by the time they get published.
They're all done. There's
anyway,
not many left.
That's right. So this study, which was commissioned of the famed Brookings Institution, which is one of a gold-plated series of think tanks that were created around this country and actually around the world after World War II, they completed their study. They came back to NASA, and we call it the Brookings Report. It actually has a more technical name, but it's dry as dust, so it's the Brookings Report. Anyway, it predicted that NASA would find life, evidence of life, artifacts left by ancient civilizations on the moon, on Mars, and potentially Venus within the next 20 years.
And here we go.
This was 1959.
Yep.
So what happened 20 years later? Nothing. You know why?
Nothing.
Because it was covered up. Now, what NASA's been doing quietly, as well as all the other space agencies, because there really is only one World Space Agency. I don't have time tonight to document that, but it's fact. They have now, they're on their ritual calendar curve, because the physics is peaking, now is the time when they can begin to release the studies, the incredible measurements, the astonishing imagery, the multiple missions, the surface rover close-ups of ancient civilizations on the moon, on Mars, and yes, it's even there on Venus in the data from the Russians, But Venus went to hell in a handbasket, now has an atmosphere 100 times thicker than the density of the air you and I are breathing tonight. It's CO2, and the temperature hovers just below 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So something really bad happened in the solar system, and only 2 worlds have survived with a semblance of the ancient ruins that NASA's known are out there for decades.
And thank God we're one of them.
Yeah. Now, this is all kabuki theater. How do you get out from under a public backlash when the general public realizes we've been lied to on the most important thing in our lives for our entire lives?
You go public with it.
Well, you go public in a particularly elegant, as they say in Washington,
organized,
plausible deniability way.
And that's what they're doing.
That's what they're doing, and at the end of the show, I'm going to reveal how they're doing it. But we have a lot to get to between now and then.
Well, we sure do. This is amazing work. By the way, you popped on a couple weeks ago, thank you, with Mark Carlotto.
Yeah, and then Mark came on with Brandenburg last Sunday.
On your show.
On my show, but I couldn't be part of my show because I'm in the northern mountains of New Mexico, and we've had terrible thunderstorms, and I've lost power and internet countless times. Yeah. Well, they carried on. They are pros.
Good.
But I'm going to invite both of them again on when I can actually do a show, because all the questions I wanted to ask did not get asked. So.
Well, you have many, that's for sure. We've got many for you tonight. By the way, you've got some graphics and some pictures you sent us.
Oh, yes. Lex has been excellent in putting up some really astonishing imagery, because the kind of story arc I want to talk about tonight, in the limited time we've got, you have more commercials than I do, is
Good.
Cydonia from then, which is back in 1976, when NASA took the first image, black and white, of this thing called the face on Mars, to tonight, to now. We have learned, despite NASA's overwhelming pretense at disinterest, an incredible amount. And, part of it I put in my book, The Monuments of Mars, City on the Edge of Forever, 5th edition. Lex, if you want to add that to my list of links, just get it from Amazon. I forgot in the rush to get everything to you.
Did I remember seeing you first talk about this in 1996 on CNN?
Yeah.
I remember seeing you on television.
What happened was some folks in Houston got access to some potentially biological information that had been unearthed from a meteorite that had fallen, was recovered in the Antarctic, and was proven to ultimately come from Mars. And in the microscopic imagery, the electron microscope images, you could see these little tiny fossilized life forms. They look like worms. So, of course, the world went nuts, right? And when NASA published this, everybody was jumping up and down. President Clinton, even made a statement on the White House lawn. And, of course, everybody was anybody. Fox, MSNBC, CBS, CNN, everybody called me because it was the first blip. Oh, my God, there could have been life on, well, there's life on Mars. Maybe they were, tiny versions of bigger life that could build these damn ruins Hoagland keeps talking about. So, bingo, I got invitations. And for my CNN, speech or interview or conversation, I physically packed up. I was in New Jersey at the time, in Weehawken, took a ferry across the river, went to the CNN studios there in southern Manhattan, and in my big portfolio, I had huge black and white blow-ups of the face on Mars. And during my entire interview, I sat there with this beautiful photograph of the high sun angle, close-up, incredible image of the face on CNN all over the world.
Richard, when you started talking about Cydonia, which was how many years ago?
40.
Wow. NASA was just always pushing geology.
Absolutely, yeah. No, we were nuts. We were crazy. We were, seeing pareidolia, which is that, mangled word that means you're just basically seeing rabbits in clouds, that kind of thing.
Exactly. But you didn't. You saw something else.
Because we saw the science. It was Vince DiPietro and Gregory Molinar, who were two Lockheed imaging experts at Goddard, my old NASA center where I became a consultant many years later. And they were, after the 76 mission of Viking, which took orbital pictures looking down in addition to the images from the landers on the surface, they saw in some of the raw imagery at Goddard in the archives, in the files, a photograph that looked like the first photo I have in my imagery file tonight. So you can tell folks how to get to them.
Just go to our website, folks. You will see the highlight reel. Click the little button under Richard Hoagland's picture, and all the pictures he sent us start showing up.
So take a look at the first one.
Yep.
That's the classic face on Mars that was released to the media, the press, television, gawkers, fans, whatever.
It's strangely like a face.
Yeah, but
really
it was dismissed by NASA at the time as a trick of light and shadow. How do I know? Because I was at JPL when they released the damn picture. And Jerry Soffin, the project scientist, stood up in front of this packed room, the Von Karman Auditorium at JPL, which has been the headquarters for so many unmanned interplanetary missions over the last decades. And for the Viking mission, it was packed from people, press from all over the world. Even the Soviet Union had press representatives there. Anyway, Soppin stands up, shows us this picture, and said, "Isn't it interesting what tricks of light and shadow will do?" When we took a picture a few hours later, of course, it all went away. Okay?
Huh.
He lied. Because years later, these two engineers at Goddard, which is another NASA center on the East Coast outside of Washington, D.C., in a place called Greenbelt, Maryland, they went through the files privately, found this first image, and like any good scientist, they said, well, wait a minute. Where is the corroborating image taken a few hours later that proved it all went away, that it was just a trick of lighting? So they went looking and looking and looking. It took them months because they then found a second picture that had been accidentally misfiled. Note the dripping sarcasm in my voice. And the second picture was taken 30 days later at a higher sun angle, could be used as a stereo pair, and it proved that it wasn't a trick of light and shadow. It was a damn mile-long, half-mile-high, three-dimensional image of a human face.
And what fascinated me about this picture, still does, is the Egyptian-looking headdress.
Absolutely. So now you go to image number 2, which is right below the one. Just scroll down slightly. The image on the left is what happens when you get one of the world's top imaging experts. I still don't know how I did this. His name is Dr. Mark Carlotto. Oh, he was on your show just.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. Anyway, I somehow seduced Mark into getting original data tapes from JPL with the help of John Brandenburg, and he got both sun angles with state-of-the-art 1983 software.
83, yeah.
He processed them. There they are side by side. The low sun angle is on the left, 35A72.
And they look about the same.
They are the same except for the changing sun angle.
Yep.
Now, next image down. This is now a composite I did of the classic Viking image on the left, totally raw, nothing's been done to it, no computer processing, no tender loving care. And the image on the right is from the Europeans, from the European Space Agency mission in 2003. That's a separation of 27 years.
Why is it in color?
Because it's a color image.
That's what they did?
No, it's what the Martians did. All Newcomb did was take a color picture from orbit of the face on Mars, and if you look at this, if you take it into an imaging program and zoom in, it's a stunning artificial structure, a building, an arcology, a mile and a half long, half a mile wide, maybe a quarter mile high, sitting there in the northern Martian desert, and it's all those different colors because it's made, George, wait for it, of glass.
The entire structure?
Yes.
Wow.
It's not a natural object, and
I was just going to ask you if they carved out some kind of mountain or something.
You can tell because of the colors. The colors are prismatic spectral colors, which we see the same thing on the moon with all the glass artifacts there. Why would ETs, aliens, an ancient terrestrial civilization, take your pick, why would they create massive structures made of glass?
Good question. Why?
Because glass is the most abundant building material in the universe.
But it shatters.
No, it doesn't.
What do you mean, no, it doesn't?
On Earth it does because we don't know how to create it in space in a vacuum. If you create glass as a structural material in a vacuum, in orbit, in space, and then bring it down to a planetary surface, it's 20 times stronger than steel.
No way. How did you know that?
Because the Los Alamos labs, just north of me here in New Mexico, back in the 1980s, conducted experiments looking forward to the day when NASA would be building, structures and bases on the moon. And they made glass, but they made glass in a vacuum. And they found, to their astonishment, it is so much stronger than plate glass here on Earth made in an atmosphere, because in a vacuum it cannot incorporate water molecules in the glass, material, and therefore it doesn't weaken the material, the melt, and so it cools much stronger than any glass ever experienced here on Earth normally for the last several hundred years.
Now, the face, Richard, is obviously a sign for people or beings to be able to see it from above.
Exactly.
Who was it for?
I think it was us.
Interesting.
I think we left a huge time capsule calling card for ourselves when, in one of those three scenarios, aliens did it, we did it, or Martians did it, it basically reflects the same genotype that we carry in ourselves. Now, when I gave my presentation in the early 90s at the UN, I discovered from, again, NASA imagery that it has a left and a right half. The left half is basically an ancient Homo erectus anthropoid that lived here on Earth about 500,000 years ago. The right half is a lion. It's a feline. It's a big kitty cat.
Like the head of the Sphinx?
Exactly. So it's telling us not only that we're connected to what we're seeing on Mars, that Mars and Earth are connected at some deep architectural and potentially species level. They're also saying that in our genome, one way of interpreting it, we also have feline genes. And guess what? About a decade later, I'm going through the literature, and there are researchers who have discovered that cats, felines, everything from house kitties to giant panthers and lions and cheetahs, etc., they are the closest non-simian genetic lineage to human beings on the planet. We're related to cats.
Somebody knew something.
Well, yeah. And now, because NASA has suddenly, out of the blue, said, we should be taking a look at alien artifacts all across the solar system, suddenly all this decades of multidisciplinary science is available to NASA to come out and claim They knew it all along.
They're supposed to come out in July with some kind of report on these UAPs.
Okay, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, give us your thoughts.
My first photograph, by the way, number one, above the Viking.
Yep.
That was sent to me this afternoon by one of our researchers. His name is Jonathan Womack. He's a hell of a computer graphics illustrator among his many other multidisciplinary talents. And he composited this image of me and the NASA panel because, of course, in an honest, just world, they should have invited me to be one of the panelists, right?
Of course.
Well, NASA doesn't do that. Instead, they're going to try to pretend we didn't exist. So, kind of tongue-in-cheek, John thought he would start the record off correctly, so I want to give him credit for a hell of a piece of graphic art.
By the way, there's an object right underneath the face that looks like a deformed alien.
Let me go look.
That's on the first picture.
The first picture. Are we talking about the large object on the right?
Bottom right.
Bottom right. That turns out to be a temple. Wait till you see what it turns out to be.
Doesn't it look like an alien head with two eyes?
Remember, pareidolia. The only reason that I know that the face on Mars is real is because Carlotto, in addition to doing stunning three-dimensional computer reconstruction, he actually did the mathematics of the face. And there's so much regular mathematics incorporated into its structure that we know the face itself is artificial. Whether that object to the lower right on this incredibly crude raw image is other than just a projection of light, that you will see in the next couple of slides if you scroll on down.
I'm looking at number 5 right now.
Okay, number 5. After Carlotto did his processing, I took one look at what was to the left of the face, and initially DiPietro and Molinar had done very similar work. But again, having another scientist do it independently, that's what science is built on, independent confirmation. Anyway, that's what we call the city. Look at all that incredibly organized pyramidal geometry.
To the left.
To the left. Look at that.
Yeah.
Now, when I first saw that, like everybody else, I thought, oh, my God, Egyptians from Mars. Pyramids, building blocks.
That's right.
Huge lines of slaves, et cetera, et cetera. This is all incredibly high-tech stuff, which has been eroding, according to our dating, which is through celestial alignments with the sun and the earth, 500,000 years ago.
Is NASA going to cite any of this?
Who knows?
Who knows?
See, this is where your audience and my audience and Clyde's audience and all the other honest people come in. Because if they don't, then we form a huge political block of interested citizens, taxpayers, who will demand that NASA own up to how this all started, which was with Vince and Greg and me.
How is Vince? I haven't talked to him in years. Is he still okay? Oh, he passed away?
Passed away a couple, 3 years ago.
Oh, my.
So he's looking down and smiling ear to ear. I have not been in touch with Greg for, an unconscionable period of time. But that's why you publish. Their work lives on. And I'm determined we're going to record for history the real backstory to how NASA suddenly one day woke up and said, oh, let's look at unidentified anomalous phenomena.
And Ingo Swann remote viewed the backside of the moon.
Yes.
And he's convinced, and he was convinced, we've lost him too, but that the backside of the moon was full of ancient alien
stuff
structures.
All over. It's just better preserved on the backside.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other show. So, moving on. Don't have a lot of time here.
Couple minutes.
Now, this is Cynthia's work. Remember Cynthia?
I don't.
Yes, no?
No.
Oh, my God. Without Cynthia, who was the art director of the Enterprise mission and one of the producers of her own show, The Other Side of the News, and The Other Side of Midnight, you and I would not be having this conversation.
I don't remember her.
Oh, my God. You've got to reread Monuments. Her story is all through it. This is a computer montage of her work, which was sculptress clay modeling. Remember Carlotto's two images?
Yep.
High and low sun angle, stereo. She worked for weeks, endless weeks, backbreaking toil, bending over a sculptor's table with clay, and the photos propped up in front of her so she could light it with a slide projector to simulate the sun at the right sun angles.
Yep.
She went back and forth, endlessly, breaking her back literally. She could barely stumble into bed at night. She was so wound up doing this, trying to figure out, was this a real three-dimensional statue? Forget the scale.
Well, her model looks just like the real version.
Exactly. So when Carlotto came on board and did his digital modeling, we compared her analog clay model with the digital model, and they're the same. And so her model, photographed in the upper right, is the cover of the first edition of the Monuments of Mars, the face as seen in profile from the center of the city to the left.
That's fantastic, Richard. You do a great job. And your website is called, you've changed it. It's now The Other Side of Midnight, right?
Well, the one of them is The Other Side of Midnight, but we still have the Enterprise Missions, plural, with an S.com.
Richard, did you ever hear about this bubble?
Yeah, just yesterday. It's not a bubble. It's a dome like the biosphere in Arizona.
Yeah.
And NASA's been doing this for decades. When Robin and I went to Mauna Kea to measure the solar eclipse some years ago on the slopes of Mauna Kea, which is the tall mountain at 19.5 in Hawaii, there is a biosphere run by NASA simulating years-long missions on Mars. There's nothing new. What's interesting is the timing of the announcement, because they're getting ready to tell us they've got to send a human mission as soon as possible.
And if they do, are they going to Sedona?
Of course they will. Do you realize it's Sedonia? It's not Sedona like in Arizona. It's Sidonia, as in Greece. Actually, it was a ancient city on the northern coast of Crete. Anyway, what they're going to do is they're going to announce that if we've got artifacts, which of course is going to come out. You asked me a question before that I didn't answer, which is what's going to happen after this NASA study is published formally in July. At the end of July. George?
Yeah.
Okay. This panel was put together by the current NASA administrator, Senator Bill Nelson, ex-Senator Nelson, and what they're supposed to do under the law is to report their recommendations like in a month. And at that point, he either rejects or accepts the recommendations. Well, never in the history of NASA has they ever rejected recommendations for one of these blue ribbon panels. So what you saw in that 4 hours they televised live, a few weeks ago,
which nobody liked.
Well, because it was too long. But there are all kinds of gems in between. It was kind of like overwhelm them with data so everybody goes to sleep.
Right, so you had to look for the gems.
And Mark lived through it. I lived through it. A lot of people lived through it.
Sure.
Anyway, buried in that 4 hours were the recommendations that's going to change history. One thing is the panel is recommending to Nelson that NASA establish at headquarters an official unidentified anomalous phenomena office, okay? You can't do anything in NASA without a program office. Like you want to send a mission to Pluto, you got to set up an office to pull all the resources together and, the engineers and the scientists and all that and make it happen.
Is this like Nick Pope's office when he was at the UK's?
No. This has much more teeth.
You think
much
so?
More, yeah.
All right.
Because they actually have to do stuff, which is one of the big criticisms during the 4 hours was that the Pentagon data on UAP, which really was kind of like a cover for UFOs, was uncalibrated. I mean, if I heard the term uncalibrated in that 4 hours once, I heard it 100 times, right? Well, guess what? NASA has literal terabytes, trillions and trillions and trillions of bits of imagery taken by its spacecraft all over the solar system, including Mars, which is already calibrated. So all they have to do is look through, which of course already done, the data, find the ruins. Oh my God, look at that. Well, Clyde, do you think that could be a city? Well, I don't know, Sam. Sure looks like a dance. In other words, they're going to go through the whole kabuki theater pretending we as presidents do not exist.
And you knew about this 40 years ago.
Yes. Now the fun part starts. Take a look at my number 7. All right? Back to the images. What do you see?
I see the sun blaring off the side of the head.
Yes. Cydonia, for all of NASA's protestations, you know, Shakespeare, I think he doth protest a bit too much. Cydonia is the most photographed area on Mars by every nation which has sent spacecraft to Mars in all of history.
And, of course, why?
Exactly. Because they've been lying. You know, one of the things that we really discovered, and that's probably why Trump got elected back in 2016, the government has been lying to us about everything. Everything. But this is the most important thing they've been lying about because it will change everything, and for the better. And that's why we need some more shows to talk about what this all means. Tonight I'm just trying to remind people we've been at this a long time using the scientific method. You know, remember, science is nothing if it's not prediction. And one of our predictions was that at some point NASA would turn around and say, oh, my God, look at this. And that's exactly what they have done. We are the Martians. And that's the subject of our next book, which we're going to hope to get out to the public and to your audience, George, by the September window of new publishing. It's now June, July, August, September. It's basically written except for the part I have to do. And we waited long enough so now we can announce to people this is the end of the runway. We have been acknowledged as legitimate. Here's all our research. When NASA sets up this UAP program office, because of Dr. Grinspoon's comments during that 4-hour television, presentation a few weeks ago, that it's now scientifically plausible to look for ancient ET artifacts all across the solar system, they will set up under the Office of UAP in NASA a sub-program office for extraterrestrial artifacts. And guess who's waiting at the front door to take them a huge amount of data?
You're going to be one of them.
You got to believe it.
What do you think of this bizarre story of this Las Vegas case? Have you been following it?
Yeah, it's more of this. Look, let me make a very flat, categorical statement.
Aliens in the backyard.
And you know I don't do that very often, right?
No, you do not. That's true.
There are now 2 tracks for acknowledgement of our relationship as Homo sapiens to whoever's out there. ETs, aliens, family, grays, Zeta Reticulans, whatever, right? There's the UFO track, spacecraft coming either through space or between dimensions to visit us and abduct us and all that crazy stuff. The other track is artifacts, ruins, things that stand still, ancient libraries. I made the decision decades ago to not pursue the UFO track because it's pointless. It's stupid. It's crazy. It's disinformation. It's been thoroughly bastardized by nonetheless in the CIA in 1954. Look it up on Google. Whereas artifacts back in 83 when we began and now are a totally pristine, still rigorously scientific field. And so there's this competition between the UFO stuff, which can be spun and disinformed and maligned and lied about, and you put fake people out there, you put people out there with zero evidence, and then you got the artifacts, which all you have to do is look at NASA's terabytes of data, and they're already there, carefully packaged, carefully credentialed, carefully calibrated, only waiting to be, quote, discovered by NASA.
I think this is an exciting time, Richard.
It's incredible. It's going to change everything. The glass on Mars is structured. It was created by architects and engineers at an incredible advanced 3D printing process. And the reason you can tell it's glass, George, is look at all those spectral colors.
Oh, I mean,
Mesas,
it's amazing.
as Robin saw with her own eyes, when the sun comes up like thunder, they do not look like that unless they're artificial.
That looked like a little sun going back, didn't it?
Yeah.
It was so bright.
Oh, by the way, this is pre-dawn. This is an hour before sunrise.
Wow.
So the only illumination is the glowing light in the east and the blue of the sky overhead. And, of course, again, according to NASA, the skies of Mars at night are black, and in the daytime they're pink because of the dust.
Was this reflection or self-generated?
It's reflection.
Fantastic.
It's intense internal specular reflection and refraction from structured artificial architectural glass. And you're right, it's a huge, huge building called an arcology in the shape of a hominid feline species. Mars is not the kind of place to raise your kids, as Elton John said.
But why? What happened?
It went to hell in a handbasket because of the gravity. The atmosphere leaked away.
Was it fast or slow?
It was slow. It was over millions of years. And the last people on Mars, remember that great billboard back in the 70s with the last folks to leave Seattle, please turn out the lights?
Right.
Well, the last folks on Mars came here. We are the Martians. And that's a huge, incredibly interesting story, which because NASA now says this is science, we can begin to tackle in public, and you ain't heard nothing yet, George. Wait till you hear, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story.
I bet they were very lucky they had an inhabitable planet so close to where they were.
Exactly.
My gosh.
And, of course, we haven't mentioned the war and a few other little details. It's all in the Monuments of Mars, a city on the edge of forever, linked up as my number 11 by Lex at the bottom of my page.
What's the name of the new book, can you say?
We're thinking of calling it We Are the Martians.
I love that. All right, Richard.
We can prove it.
You take care of yourself. Say hi to Steve Bassett for me when he's on the other side of midnight.
Thanks, George. Thanks,
right.
Tom.
Richard Hoagland, he's been around coast to coast way longer than me. He's an institution. The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.